like we pointed out last week, this judges cycle, as it's called, for 350 years, the period of the judges went in this cycle over and over and over. Prosperity, apostasy, oppression, repentance, and deliverance. And what would happen is, just in this order, the Israelites would be prosperous, then they would leave God. They would forget God, they would turn away from God. Then God would raise up an oppressor, and that's a key point there, that God raised up these oppressors. And then the people would finally repent and cry out to God, and then God would raise up a deliverer, and that deliverer was called a judge. That's who the judges were. They were the deliverers that God would raise up to rescue His people, His penitent people, from the oppressors that were giving them trouble. Now, also we pointed out that these judges did not operate in succession, one after the other, but more or less, and they weren't over the whole land each, but they were over small, limited portions, and sometimes at the same time. They were simultaneous at times. And like I said, we're going to look at Gideon and Samson. Gideon up in this region, Samson down in this region. Probably the two most famous of them, and we're going to look at them because their stories are so impactful. And really, we're going to learn a lesson. We're looking at the narrative of Scripture, but we learn lessons from the narratives of Scripture. And we're going to learn the same lesson from these two judges. And by the way, Ruth is going to be thrown in here too. The book of Ruth will be in the section we're going to look at tonight. We're going to learn the same lesson from these two judges, but from different perspectives. From Gideon, we're going to learn it from a positive perspective. And then in Samson, we're going to learn it in a negative perspective. And the lesson is that my power is really God's power. My strength is really God's strength. And whenever I separate myself from God, I don't have any strength. Really, we'll learn that in Samson's life, but we'll learn it in Gideon's life also. So, whenever we turn to Judges chapter 6, about 200 years into the theocracy of Israel, which is the government form that God intended the nation of Israel to have, no king, no earthly ruler, just God. We again read about national apostasy. So we're in the Judges cycle again, and because of this, as we read, Israel did what was evil in the sight of Jehovah, and Jehovah gave them into the hand of the Midianites for 7 years. The hand of Midian for 7 years. And 7 years into this oppression, verse 6, the people cried out to God. They cried out to Jehovah for help. So, it says when the people of Israel cried out to Jehovah on account of the Midianites, He didn't immediately send them a judge, but what did He send them? According to verse 8. A prophet. Now, who wants a prophet whenever they're in trouble? The Midianites are oppressing us, and they're giving us trouble, and they're persecuting us. Well, we'll send you a prophet. Just what they wanted, right? Probably not. Well, that's when God said, listen, look at all I've done for you, and you have not obeyed my voice. I've done all this, and I commanded you, but you didn't obey my command. How was that supposed to help them? Well, to explain to them why this was happening, for one, to explain that it was happening, it was coming from Him. But then it says, now the angel of Jehovah came and sat under the terebinth at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash, the Abiezrite, while his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. This is one of those statements that would be so easy to overlook, the first part of this verse. And I'll be honest with you, I don't really know exactly what it means. I don't know what it entails. I don't know if people could see him. But look what it says. The angel of Jehovah came and sat under the terebinth, a tree, at this village or city of Ophrah. He's there sitting under a tree. The angel of Jehovah. Like I said, could people see him there? I don't know. He looked like a man? I assume he did. But it just kind of intrigues me, the idea of the angel of Jehovah just coming and sitting down under this tree. Just catching some shade or something. I don't know. So, it says that Gideon, the son of Joash, was beating out wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. We pointed this out before. Anything seem wrong with that picture? He's beating out wheat in the wine press. What do you do in a wine press? You press the wine, don't you? Well, that's what it sounds like. What do you not do in the wine press? Well, a lot of things. One of them's beat out the wheat. Not usually. That's unusual. Well, the reason is because he was trying to hide it from the Midianites. You see, the Midianites would come in and take all their stores, their stuff. So he was doing this to hide. He was hiding. It wasn't the time to be trading out or to be doing anything at the wine press. So he's going to beat out the wheat in the wine press. They won't check the wine press. At least they haven't yet. But that's when the angel of Jehovah appeared to Gideon there and said, Jehovah is with you, O mighty man of valor. So Gideon is here, hiding in the wine press, beating out wheat secretly. I don't know, he may be, looking over his shoulder every few seconds. He's worried. I don't know. Maybe he's not worried. Maybe they're not near all the time. But at any rate, some people might call that a cowardly move. And yet the angel of Jehovah appears and calls him a mighty man of valor. Some versions say, you brave hero. Or at least that's what the Hebrew how that could be translated. You're a brave hero. Gideon is a brave hero. Well, is he a brave hero? Apparently not. Not yet. He hasn't done anything. He's hiding at this point. He doesn't look like a hero at all. A hero would be, beating out the wheat wherever he was supposed to be doing it. I don't care if the Midianites come. Let them come. They're not going to touch my wheat.
A dead guy is not a brave guy.
That's true.
Not much he can do if he's dead.
That is true. That's probably how he thought of it, Hey, I'm no use to anybody if I'm dead. But yeah. But he says, please, sir, or Lord, if Jehovah is with us, because that's what he just told him, Jehovah's with you. If Jehovah's with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are the his wonderful deeds that our fathers recounted to us, saying, did not Jehovah bring us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord Jehovah has forsaken us and given us into the hand of Midian. Now this is why I love Gideon. One of the reasons is because of this verse, because it's so familiar to us today. I believe a lot of Christians feel this way. If Jehovah's with us, then why is this stuff happening? And even more, where are all God's wonderful deeds that our fathers told us about? From our vantage point, it will be, where are all His wonderful deeds that we read about in the Bible? Why don't any of those things happen anymore? And Gideon was struggling with this. So he was asking a sincere question. He wasn't trying to be disrespectful or mocking. He was just asking a legitimate question. You said Jehovah's with us. Well, then, if that's true, then what's going on here? Well, God by means of that prophet that he already sent, explained that. But the angel of Jehovah, by the way, here's another instance where we can see that the angel of Jehovah is Jehovah. If you compare verses 12 and 14, makes it more than clear. Because in verse 12 we see the angel of Jehovah appeared to Gideon, but then in verse 14, after Gideon asked those two questions, it says, and Jehovah turned to him and said, go in this might of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Do not I send you? And then he said, please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the least in my father's house. Jehovah said to him, there it is again, but I will be with you, and you shall strike the Midianites as one man. And then he said to him, eventually, he said, alas, Lord Jehovah, for now I've seen the angel of Jehovah face to face. Now he's scared for his life. But he comforted him. He said, don't worry, you're not going to die. Gideon built an altar there, called it Jehovah is Peace. So he was given a commission then. He wanted to fix him a nice something to be hospitable. Said, don't leave, I want to fix you something. And he did all that. Built that altar. Then it said, that night Jehovah said to him, take your father's bull and the second bull, 7 years old, pull down the altar of Baal that your father has and cut down the Asherah that is beside it and build an altar to Jehovah your God on the top of the stronghold here with stones laid in due order. Then take the second bull and offer it as a burnt offering with the wood of the Asherah that you shall cut down. So Gideon took 10 men of his servants and did as Jehovah had told him. But because he was too afraid of his family and the men of the town to do it by day, he did it by night. Brave hero. He did it, right? There's no indication whatsoever that God was displeased with that. He did it. God didn't say do it by day. He just said do it, and Gideon did it. Now, the Asherah. We see here that, I guess in the context, we learn or can assume maybe that what the Asherah is, but it's not necessarily the case, but we do know from other testimony, other information. The Asherah apparently were these groves of trees of some kind that were used in some way of in idolatry. They were somehow idolatrous. So that's what the Asherah is whenever we read about that in the Old Testament. So he's going to cut down these trees. And he's going to use that wood to make this offering on the altar that is going to be made to Jehovah. Now also notice that Gideon's father was an idolater. Pull down the altar of Baal that your father has, he says. And then cut down that Asherah, that grove or whatever of trees, whatever exactly that was. And he did it. He did as Jehovah told him, that verse 27 begins. That's why he was given the name Jerubbaal. Not because it wasn't an idolatrous name, but it was apparently a name that was indicative of his destroying Baal. It says it means let Baal contend against him because he broke down his altar. So that's why Gideon was given that other name. Although if you didn't know the meaning of it, you might assume that he was given an idolatrous name, because usually when Baal is in your name, just like when Jehovah is in your name, it means it's somehow an honor to whatever God is in your name. Now Gideon, another thing I love about Gideon is how hesitant he was. So he asked God, he says, I need you to show me a sign. If you will save Israel by my hand, as you've said, behold, I'm going to lay this fleece of wool on the threshing floor, and if there's dew on that fleece and no dew on the ground, then I'll know. Did it? Got up, That's exactly how it was. Rose early in the morning. Dew all over the fleece, not a drop on the ground. And then he said, please don't let your anger burn against me, God. Just let me speak one more time. Let's do this again, one more time. But this time, no dew on the fleece and only dew on the ground. He reversed it. And it was so. God did it that night. And so now, I guess that was enough for Gideon. He didn't ask for another one. The thing that Gideon might be most known for is what happens in chapter 7, his army. Now it says that he had 32,000 men with him. And then God tells him, or by the way, here are the odds. We got 32,000 for Gideon. And the army that he's fighting against, 135,000. That's pretty rough. Gideon versus Midian. 32,000 versus 135,000. Okay? Now guess what God tells him? Here's what God tells him. Gideon, I got to tell you, your army's too big. Got too many men. This is just not going to work. Here he is by this spring. Midian's army's got about 135,000. We learned that from chapter 8, verse 10. God says, we're going to have to get rid of some of these men. Why? Why did he say that? How on earth could God have... I'm pretty sure God knows how to count. He's probably pretty good at mathematics and odds too. 32,000 versus 135,000. And he says, Gideon has too many? Why did he say that? Yeah. Yep. He said at the end of verse 2, lest Israel boast over me, saying, my own hand has saved me. He didn't want there to be any risk of them thinking that they did this themselves. So he said, we're going to get rid of some of these men. Go out there. This is step 1. He tells every man who is fearful and trembling to go home. Guess what happened? 22,000 men went home. I would like to see the look on Gideon's face as they just kept going and going and going. Like, when is it going to stop? Everybody's scared. Everybody's fearful and trembling. Well, Gideon may have expected God to say, okay, that didn't work. Didn't work how I planned, how I thought it would. We'll get you some men back. I'll get some back. But nope, God said, yeah, still too many. 10,000 left. So now we got 10,000 versus 135,000. He says, still too many. And again, how in the world could that be too many? So he says, here's what we're going to do. Here we're at this river, this spring. He says, take your men over to this spring and separate men who lap the water from those who kneel down to drink the water. Now this situation, to try to picture it when you're just reading it, I've always viewed it backwards of what it apparently is. Because it seems, the men who lap the water, let me see the verse here. Laps the water with his tongue as a dog laps. You set them aside. And then you set everyone who kneels down. Now, how in the world are you going to lap the water like a dog laps without kneeling down? Because he says these are the two groups, the ones who lap it like a dog and the ones who kneel down. Well, apparently the ones who lap it like a dog are those who are going to take it up in their hands. And then they're going to lap it out of their hands. Now, the other question is, what's the difference in these two? And it could be interpreted one of two ways as well. The one is, there's really just two options. One of the groups is likely going to be considered to be more faithful, more trusting of God than the other. The question is, which one is it? Which group? Or maybe it's the fact that and the other question is, which group is God going to choose? The one that seems to be more savvy with military expertise, or the ones that aren't? It seems the idea is that the ones who lapped it up from their hands were the ones who were more fearful. And the reason being because as they lap it up with their hands, they're able to look around. You got your head down in the water, you're not really paying attention to anything, at least for the time that you're drinking. But the ones that lapped it up, or it could be neither. There could be nothing at all, no reasoning at all. Some have said the ones that lapped it up in their hands were just smarter. They did it in a smarter way, not so foolish, because if you're down there lapping up the water or drinking it kneeling down, your enemies could, come up on you, and then you're done for. Well, in the context, if it had anything to do with that, it seems that God would have picked the ones that were less militarily apt or whatever, the ones that were not so savvy in that way, because the same reason that God wanted to cut down on the numbers. But at any rate, guess how many? 300. Now we got 300 who lapped up the water from their hands, and God says, Gideon, there's your army right there. You and these 300 men versus 135,000. So, long story short, they win. That's all that can really be said. He says, with those 300 men, I'm going to save you. I'm going to deliver you. I'm going to give you victory. Well, after this happened, after it was over, the men of Israel said to Gideon, we want you to rule over us, and we want your son to rule over us after you, and your grandson to rule over us after him. What's that sound like? That sounds like a monarchy. That's a king right there. They said, Gideon, you're our guy. We want you to rule over us. But Gideon said, I will not rule over you. My son will not rule over you. Jehovah will rule over you. And he was right to say that. But then the saddest part of Gideon's story happens. And we don't have enough information to really understand exactly what was going on. We do have enough information to understand and see that Gideon messed up. I don't know, that's all we can say. He really did well in verse 23, but then he had them make this ephod, which was, a shoulder dress, the shoulder dress of the high priest, and it probably also included that Urim and the Thummim, those things that somehow they communicated with God and were able to get divine counsel on certain things. This was for the priest, the high priest. Well, what business does Gideon have having the people make him this thing that the high priest is supposed to wear? He don't have any business doing that. But they did. And guess what happened? Israel, it says, all Israel whored after it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and to his family. So this was a problem. And it is a stain on Gideon's record, and we don't really have any record of it changing before he died. So the last thing in Gideon's life, similar to Solomon, we read about this grave error at the end of Solomon's life, and it was so with Gideon as well. It says, one writer said, his sin consisted chiefly in his invading the prerogative of the Aaronic priesthood, drawing away the people from the one legitimate sanctuary, and thereby not only undermining the theocratic unity of Israel, but also giving an impetus to the relapse of the nation into the worship of Baal after his death. He helped them go back into idolatry, the very thing that he was supposed to save them from, and did help to do that. Now, he messed it all up. So Gideon sadly messed up near the end of his life. Now, after Gideon, between Judges 12 and 13, that's where the book of Ruth fits in. So the book of Ruth takes place after chapter 12. Chapters 9 through 12 are the Judges number 6 through number 12. And these writers just give us a description of these periods. The period of the Judges had run its course to the end. We're getting near the end of the period of Judges, and it's just not working out. It's a very unfortunate time period in the history of Israel. It says the result had been general disorganization, almost complete disintegration of the tribes, and decay of the sanctuary. Another writer said it was in the 12th century BC that the Philistines began to play a dominant role in politics and the military efforts of the land of Canaan. This timing was no accident. It was no accident because of the same cycle we've been seeing. God is at work here. And then in chapter 13 it says the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of Jehovah. So Jehovah gave them up into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. So here we're going again in this Judges cycle. But again, in between Judges 12 and 13, that's where Ruth, the book of Ruth, takes place between Judges 12 and 13. And with Judges 13 comes the story or the ministry of Samson. Okay, won't even look at Ruth, but the short version of the book of Ruth. Why is the book of Ruth even in the Bible? Because it tells us about, not only do we have a type of Christ in Boaz, but ultimately we have a little piece of the ancestry of Jesus in there. That's what the significance is. But the main significance is, not only is Ruth an ancestress of Jesus, but she was a Gentile. There's another ancestress of Jesus that was a Gentile that we've already met. Ruth is another one. Rahab being one. All right, very quickly, we're going to try to get through this. Samson. We pointed out last week, what do we know about Samson? When you hear the name Samson, I've only known one Samson in my whole life, many, many, many years ago. But when I don't think of him when I hear the name Samson. I think of this guy. And when you think of this guy, what do you think of? Hair. Everybody. I mean, that's what they're going to say. Hair. He was the hair guy. He was that guy with the hair. Even more than Absalom. He was the guy with the hair. And not only was he the guy with the hair, he had some problems. Samson's an interesting character. There are some accounts in the Bible that could really stand alone. The book of Job could stand all by itself. And it would be a masterpiece even if it wasn't in the Bible. I believe that Judges 13 through 16 could do that as well. Could be all by itself. Even if it wasn't part of the Bible, it would still just be such a fascinating story. But it all started when this man of Zorah, of the tribe of Dan, his name was Manoah. His wife was barren, had no children, but the angel of Jehovah showed up and said, "You're going to have a son." And it says, "No razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazirite to God from the womb. And he shall begin to save Israel from the hand of the Philistines." Now, what's a Nazirite? Okay, the Nazirite was this special group of people that made a vow to God, and it was almost always a temporary thing. So you could take the Nazirite vow for a week, a month, a year, a few years. But some, very few characters in the Bible, in the Old Testament, were lifelong Nazirites. And Samson was one of them. That's what we're reading about here. From the womb to the day of his death, he is to be a Nazirite, which means he will not be able to drink anything from the vine, not even eat grapes. Can't eat grapes. That's how serious it was. That's how strict. Eat nothing unclean. Can't come in contact or go near a dead body of any kind, animal or human. And some more things as well. Manoah prayed to God. He said, please let the man of God whom you sent come again to us and teach us what we are to do. See, the angel came to the wife. And he believed his wife when she told him about it. He said, let him come back and tell us what we need to do. He says, God listened to the voice of Manoah, came back, and they explained this. Finally, she has a son. And that son's name was Samson. It says the young man grew and Jehovah blessed him, and the Spirit of Jehovah began to stir him. Now, I pointed out in the past that almost every single time that we read in the Bible of the Holy Spirit rushing or coming upon somebody, the immediate thing that they do is they prophesy. They speak intelligible words from God. Samson is pretty much the only exception to that rule. And when the Spirit of Jehovah came upon him, he did some weird things. Or at least we think they sound weird, but he's really doing exactly what God called him to do. Remember that we just read. He's going to begin to save the Israelites from the hand of the Philistines. So whenever the Spirit of Jehovah came upon him, that's what he did. He was in some way, in some small measure, saving the Israelites from the hand of the Philistines. Now, here's what we read Samson did. Now he's grown up. Samson went down to Timnah. And at Timnah, he saw one of the daughters of the Philistines. Told his mom, got to have that woman. No, I don't want anybody else, period. They said, well, son, maybe you ought to. Nope. She's the one. And that's the end of that. So that's the way it was going to be. So they're going to go down and visit. On the way, it says, a young lion came at him, roaring. The Spirit of Jehovah rushed upon Samson, and although he had nothing in his hand, he tore that lion in pieces. I love the description, though. It says, I sort of I simplified it in brackets there, but if you read it, it says, he tore the lion in pieces as one tears a young goat. I've never seen anybody tear a young goat before. I've never tried to tear a young goat. I don't know what that means, but apparently it means easy. He did it easily. Now, I've got a friend who is convinced that if a wolf came at him, he would be able to take that wolf down. I tried to argue with him, but he's convinced. He just has this move he would do that he would just snap his, he'd jump at him, he'd just get him, and he'd snap his neck. And I said, I don't think you understand. That wolf will tear your arm straight off if you try to do that. But Samson did it with a lion. That lion came at him, and he killed that lion with his bare hands. Well, he didn't tell mom and dad about that. I would. I'd go tell everybody. But maybe there's a reason. But at any rate, probably that Nazirite vow had something to do with it. Well, later on when they're traveling down that road again, the dead body of that lion is there, and it's got, enough time has passed. There's a beehive in it apparently, and honeybees. They made honey. He reaches in there, scraped it out with his hands, and he's eating the honey as he walks. Exactly. Yeah, he wasn't supposed to do that. And, it doesn't seem to really come to much, but there's a reason that's recorded, I think. And it's not just because of the riddle he's going to tell, but this is a violation of his Nazirite vow. The Bible doesn't say it, point it out. By the way, that's a violation. But we know it was because that was part of the Nazirite vow. And it may be that we see a little bit of Samson's character in that. He didn't really respect his vow as much as he maybe should have, which we're going to see later on as well. Well, yeah, unless he let go of it before it was dead, I don't know. It's about to die, I better let go because I can't violate my vow. I don't know. He probably didn't care. He wasn't concerned, more than likely. But later on, and again, verse 19, he tells a riddle. This is what in the Middle East, apparently this was a big thing, and apparently still is to this day, telling riddles in this way. That's why they said, hey, tell us a riddle. Or he said, I'll give you a riddle. It wasn't really a fair riddle at all, to be honest. Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. Now, how in the world are they ever going to... How can you guess that? How can you get that? It said you got 3 days to solve it, or however many days. And they couldn't solve it after 3 days. So on the 4th day, they went to his new wife and said, entice your husband, you better get that answer. We're not going to lose this riddle. You better tell us the answer. Or we're going to burn your house down with you in it. They're pretty serious, apparently. That's a pretty heavy threat. Samson's wife wept over him and said, you hate me. You don't love me. If you love me, you'd tell me the riddle, the answer. So he told her. And she told them. And they guessed it. And it's one of my favorite statements of Scripture right here. If you hadn't plowed with my heifer, you wouldn't know the answer to my riddle. Now, you just don't go plowing with another man's heifer. That's not something you're supposed to do. But that's what they did. He said, if you hadn't plowed with my heifer, you wouldn't know the answer. Don't plow with another man's heifer. Don't ever do it. Especially Samson's heifer. If there was ever a man's heifer you didn't want to plow with, it's Samson's heifer. Well, he's mad. He storms out. But this is not some angry fit. And that's the significance of verse 19. The Spirit of Jehovah rushed upon Samson, and he went down to Ashkelon, and he killed 30 men. Now, we might think he was mad. He just went down there in a rage, and he just started murdering people left and right. But that's why it's very important to notice that phrase. The Spirit of Jehovah rushed upon him. What he did there at Ashkelon, God did that. God did that. Even though Samson was in hot anger. And by the way, he was in such hot anger, he went home and left his wife there. He left her right there. He left her there with those psycho men that were going to burn her house, burn them, her and her father in the house, because he was so mad. And then his wife was given to his friend. Because the father-in-law, her father, thought he didn't want her anymore. And, give him a break, cut him some slack. That's certainly what it looked like. If you get married and you leave your new wife at home and you go back to your home without a word, it kind of appears that you don't want her anymore. Well, after some time, he came back. He's like, I'm going to go to my wife. I'm going to bring her a young goat. We'll have a jolly old time. Maybe this was an apology goat. You ever gotten your wife an apology goat? This is an I'm sorry goat. I've heard of flowers, and I've heard of maybe some kind of jewelry or something. I've never heard of a young goat. Maybe that works. But he is devastated or very angry to hear about what's happened. And the father's like, oh, I thought you hated her. I thought you were done with her. I gave her away. Why don't you take her sister? By the way, she's better looking anyway. That's what he says. She's more beautiful. Isn't she more beautiful? He's probably scared, she may have been, the ugliest thing you ever saw, but he's trying to, look, she's more beautiful anyway, Please don't kill me. Please don't tear me like you would tear a young goat. Well, here he goes again. Samson went and caught 300 foxes, and he took torches, and he turned them tail to tail and put a torch between each pair of tails. And he set them loose in the fields. They burned the Philistines' fields down. This guy is really something. How do you catch 300 foxes? And how much time? This must have taken some time. But then he not only caught them, he tied their tails together and the torches in there, lit the torches, and then, if you tie two foxes' tails together and then put a lit torch in there, what else are they going to do but run? And they're going to have to learn to work together because they're going to try to get away from that torch. And in the meantime, they're burning these fields down. They were going to learn. Well, we'll fast forward a little bit. It says, Samson was caught. They knew that he did it. Samson said, if this is what you will do, I swear I will be avenged on you, and then I'll quit. It says he struck him hip and thigh with a great blow. So he's slaying people left and right because that's what God intended for him to do. He was killing Philistines. Doing the battle, he was fighting the battle of Jehovah, like we just sang a second ago. Well, guess what ended up happening? That threat they made to his wife, they did that. They carried it out because of what Samson had done. They killed that innocent woman and her family. Burned the house down, burned the house with them inside it. That's when he struck him hip and thigh with a great blow. And then some people of Judah came to him and said, they knew that he was hiding there. These are his own people now. He said, if you're going to hand me over, I'll let you do it. Because if he didn't want them to do it, they weren't going to be able to do it. This is Samson. He said, all I want you to do is promise me that you won't fight against me yourself. And they promised that. So they tied him up with 2 new ropes. New ropes. Strong ropes. Not old dried out rotted things. New ropes. Brought him. Spirit of Jehovah rushed upon him. Those ropes that were on his arms became as flax that caught fire, and they just melted right off his hands. Then he found the fresh jawbone of a donkey. The fresh jawbone of a donkey. Oops, I got ahead of myself. And he killed 1,000 men with it. Don't you wish cell phones existed then, or video cameras? I want to see a man kill 1,000 people with the fresh jawbone of a donkey. I want to see that. About as much as I want to see him catch 300 foxes and tie their tails together. A fresh jawbone of a donkey. And he got a little puffed up here and said, hey, God, a little tired here and thirsty doing all your work for you. Give me a little water. And he gave him water, mercifully. He should have probably given him a slap across the face or worse. But God gave him the water, and he drank it, and his spirit returned, his spirit revived. And
That would be pretty exhausting, though.
exhausting?
Killing 1,000 men with
Nah. That's nothing. He must have had some moves, some athletic moves. Well, very quickly, Samson went to Gaza and he saw a prostitute there. Then he got into some more trouble. Then after that, he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek. Have you figured out what Samson's problem is yet? Samson had a lady problem. Everywhere he went, he saw a lady, and that's when he got in trouble. He had an eye for the ladies, and he went for the ladies. And he was stupid, too. No disrespect. But this lady's name was Delilah. She was a wicked, heartless, I don't even know if it's appropriate to say what kinds of things that she was, because they're not pretty words. She was something else. She was just awful, pure evil. She manipulated him. Same thing with the riddle. They said, you need to find out where his strength lies. He kept making these things up. Well, if you tie my hands, with, this or that, then I'll lose my strength. Or if you get, 7 strings from a bow or whatever it said. Well, finally, she said, how can you say I love you when your heart's not with me? Boo-hoo. And it says she pressed him hard with her words day after day and urged him, and his soul was vexed to death. She drove him crazy. And he finally told her, if you get rid of my hair, then my strength will leave me, and I'll be weak and become like any other man. Now, here's a thing about this with Samson. He was still wrong. And he focused a little bit too much on himself, didn't he? If you cut my hair, then my strength will leave me. He still wasn't really giving God the proper credit. But at any rate, when they did that, it worked. This time she said, hey, the Philistines are coming. And he said, I'll just get up like I always did. See, he thought he could still do it. Even though he told her the truth. He thought he'd still be able to do it. But it didn't work. Now, was the strength in his hair? Not exactly. What was special about his hair not being cut? The vow. So what would happen then when his hair was cut or shaved? He broke his vow. He was supposed to be a Nazirite from the womb to death. So when he broke his Nazirite vow, God was no longer with him. So when he cut his hair, God was no longer with him. So the strength didn't have any connection to his hair directly. It was about that vow and his connection to God. Now, the Philistines caught him then, and verse 20 gives the key. He didn't know that Jehovah had left him. That's why he thought he'd be able to do it again. And you want to see what kind of woman Delilah was? It wasn't enough for her to do this to him, but after they had shaved his head and they had him sort of bound in some way, it says she tormented him. Pure evil. Philistines caught him. They grabbed him. They gouged out his eyes. Doesn't matter how strong you are if you don't have eyes. That's a fact. So they knew their business. We'll just take his eyes. He can't do anything. Don't care how strong he is. But there's a little foreshadowing there when it says, here he is grinding it at the mill in the prison like a brute beast. But the hair of his head started to grow again. That's a little hint that something else is in this is coming. Well, now they're celebrating in their God's temple. They said, hey, go get Samson so he can entertain us, so we can laugh at him because he's just a stupid beast man with no eyes. How cruel can people be? They just wanted to see him. He wasn't going to do anything to entertain them. He was just going to be there. And they were going to think it was so funny. Look, there's that guy that, used to be so big and bad, and now, he's nothing. So he's having to be led by hand. How humiliating. And finally, he turns around spiritually. And I didn't used to see it this way, but now I'm inclined to think that this is a repentance on his part. And it was a turnaround in his life. It says, Samson called to Jehovah. And by the way, he said, let me feel the pillars on which the house rests. Why do you think he would ask that? Because he couldn't find them if he didn't lead him there. He's never going to find those pillars. But he's got a trick up his sleeve. So here he is against those pillars. And he prays to God. And it's a totally different prayer than that last one he prayed. Well, a little thirsty down here, God. You going to help me out? Now he said, please remember me and strengthen me only this once, that I may be avenged on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And then he grasped those 2 pillars, the middle ones, and he leaned his weight against them, and then he prayed one more prayer. He said, let me die with them. I'm going to do this, but I want you to let me die too. That's sad. That's tragic. That's a tragedy. He wanted to die. He wanted this to be his last thing. God could have made that whole thing fall down and Samson be unharmed. But he asked to die with the Philistines. And it says, here he goes. He knocks this thing down. And he killed more people in that event than he killed in his whole life fighting. Samson, the hair man with all the strength. He had a problem. He had a woman problem. He had a pride problem. But he did God's work in the way God could use him. He went around killing Philistines to save them. He began to save them from the hand of the Philistines. So, as dark and tragic a period as the Judges period is, it ends with the dark and tragic life of this man. But his life ended in glory. He had a comeback. But the question we have to ask is this: will the same be said of the nation at large? Will the nation have the same fate that Samson had, where they have this comeback, this turnaround into light? because for now, they've totally failed. They failed the theocracy. It could have worked, but they ruined it. They weren't strong enough. They didn't have the self-discipline to have Jehovah as their only king. Proving that, but it was going to get even darker because the sons of the high priest, Eli, were worthless men. And Eli was negligent. And so now even the priesthood's becoming corrupt. Things are not looking good for Israel. And we're kind of left in suspense as to what's going to happen and how they can go on. Will they last long enough to fulfill their ultimate purpose, which was to bring the Christ into the world? Doesn't even look like they're going to make it that far at this point. So we have this progressive deterioration, and it is just not looking good for the nation. And for us, by the way, at this point in history, as far as the Savior coming into the world. But something was on the horizon at Shiloh, because a man named Samuel was soon to arrive on the scene. So, will the nation be able to maintain their integrity long enough? Samuel's going to come, and he's going to be a huge asset to the people. But we'll look at that, Lord willing, next week. Already gone over the time. Please forgive me. Please.